Hi, welcome to Farmland Access, a webinar co-sponsored by Compeer and in partnership with Renewing the Countryside. I'm Jennifer Nelson, and I work for Moses, the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service. I work in close partnership with Renewing the Countryside on the Farmland Access for Beginning Farmers program. So in this first installment of this three-part series, we're going to talk about tenure basics and assembling a team to help you find land. So our agenda today includes the basics of tenure. There are a number of different ways that you can achieve land tenure. We'll talk through that. And then we'll talk about creative paths, because with land costs and all the challenges for beginning farmers, it's really important to know about some of the creative paths that you can take to land ownership or leasing land, or however you want to achieve tenure. And then how to build a team. Who do you need on your team? Who can help you in your journey to acquiring land to farm? So the basics of land tenure, and just to be really clear on some of these definitions, tenure is just to hold, okay? Land tenure is holding land in some way. And in order to do that, you need to have some things. You need to have some security, and that can be through financial assets, through other assets that you have. Maybe you already have a tractor, you already have markets for your farm business. There's a number of different ways that you can kind of assess how secure you are. Equitability, that's a huge thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And affordability, those two things are really key to beginning farmers having success, all beginning farmers. A path for building equity. How are you going to make money? How are you going to continue to make money and to build equity to increase the value of your farmland? And then really important for all things farming is flexibility. Gotta be flexible in your journey. Okay, so this is a really cool document. I know there's a lot of words on it. I'm going to use my cursor because I think you can see that, just to kind of point out where I'm at on this document. So we have worked closely with Land for Good. Land for Good is an organization on the East Coast, and in many ways, I think the land challenges that the Midwest is starting to face, they have already gone through a lot of that. So they have some creative ways to deal with that already figured out. And so we've, through our Renewing the Countryside land access program that started 3 years ago, relied on them and used many of their resources. It's been really helpful. So this decision tool organizes the common and less common farmland access methods that you might consider in your path to secure land or to achieve land tenure. So you want to start with your goal. What's your goal? Do you want to access farmland? Do you want to own a farm now? Do you want to own a farm in the future? Or do you want to rent a farm? Are you working on creating and stabilizing your markets for your farm business? Maybe your best bet for a couple of years is to rent some land until you achieve your goal in establishing those markets and saving some money for a down payment, or whatever route you want to go. So if you do choose to go, you're in a place where you're ready to own a farm now, then you've got a few different arrangements that you can work with to acquire that land. Sole ownership is really well known, I think, maybe one of the more well-known ways. It's kind of what people traditionally think of. And if you are so privileged, you have outright cash purchase. Maybe you just have really worked hard and saved some money, or you've got some family money or whatever, and you're able to just purchase a farm. Finance purchase. You can work with a conventional or an alternative lender. The USDA Farm Service Agency has some great farm ownership programs. If you've been farming for 3 years and you've kind of worked out your markets and gone through some of that, that might be a great option for you. Seller financed. This just does happen where the seller, maybe it's a unique situation where they want their land to go to somebody who's going to continue farming it organically or doing rotational grazing or whatever. So they will help finance you buying their farm. A gift is also an option from family members or another philanthropist. It happens, or inheritance, that can also happen. So this is kind of the ways that you can get into sole ownership. So then you think about who's going to be involved. A private bank, a conventional bank, maybe a state or federal lender. Like I talked about FSA, they do a lot of beginning farmer loans. Seller financer is an option. Community or alternative lender. GoFundMe is a very popular way to just crowdsource money and to help people protect land and put money where their values are. Family, trust, employers, or other private landowners might also be involved in that method of acquiring land. You might be in a situation where you want to share ownership interest. You might have a group of farmers or a group of farmers with some non-farmers that really want to get together and own some farmland together. So you can do this in a few different ways. You can form a cooperative, you can form an LLC, you can also form a corporation. And you can dig into those a little bit more as you get deeper into this process. And actually, Hannah Brockville is the interviewee on this webinar, and she has an awesome story and really interesting. And that's one of the ways that she worked towards owning land. So who might be involved? Other farmers, community members, investors, and family members. These are just things to be thinking about. Partial ownership interests. So maybe you're not quite ready to make that leap to completely own land and buildings and everything that's involved. So you could do a ground lease where you build a pack shed or you build a house or something like that, and you're renting the land that you're doing that on. So you're building equity that way, and yet you don't have to take on that full mortgage payment, or however, you're not fully all in at that point. There's life estate option where a non-farmer retains the rights to occupy. So maybe you have some sort of contract worked out that if the non-farmer wants to live on it for a certain amount of time, then you have an agreement where that can happen, but you're using the land to farm and live on, and what you need to do for your farm business. And then easement. And easement is something that I've really been working a lot with lately, and I think it's going to become more and more of a popular way and useful way to protect farmland and to make it more affordable in the Midwest. This has been done a lot on the East and even the West Coast. And so we'll get a little bit more into that. But that's where an entity holds development rights. So if the land can't be developed, then it potentially is worth less money. So then it's more affordable. And then maybe there's like a conservation easement or an easement that keeps it in farmland forever. Like it can only be farmed. It can't have other things done on it. So there's a number of different ways and nuances and things that go into easements, but it's a great way to protect land. So who can be involved? The community land trust, a conservation land trust. And these are entities that hold land for protecting it. Other nonprofit, public agencies, private parties, and investors. So you're getting out of the family and the private lender or the state lender, and they might also collaborate in a project like this, but you're getting into some other ways of holding and managing land. Okay, so you're not quite ready, but you know that you want to own a farm in the future. So things to think about, paths that you can think about and you can really start preparing for. Lease to own, that's always a great way. If you can find a situation where that works for both the seller and the beginning farmer buyer, that can be a great option. Again, we talked about land contract. So like the farmer pays the landowner and then some of that money goes towards the purchase. That can be a really, really good option too. Forming an LLC, a cooperative or a corporation where the equity is gradually transferred to the farmer, that can be an option. And then a gift over time can also work as a path to future ownership. Again, the people involved will vary according to these different paths, but private landowner, family, nonprofit, government entity, investors are some that might be involved in some of these path to future ownership options. And then the final goal could be that you want to rent a farm. And there's a couple of ways to do that. You have no interests or rights to the land. So you just set that up. And this is not as common as leasehold interest in the land, but no interest to the land. The farmer has an agreement granting permission to use the land. So they're technically not a tenant, but you have like a license or a permit or some kind of agreement that says you can farm on this land. Again, you'd want to have a really clear document drawn up and enlist a lawyer and get some support on that. So that could be a private landowner, a public or government entity, nonprofit, or another landholding entity. And then this is the more common of the two, leasehold interest in the land. So you have a contractual agreement assigning use rights and responsibilities, and maybe written. It also may be oral. This is something that you want to make sure that you have a really good relationship and a very clear. We have some great templates. It's important to have a clear document or oral agreement where both parties understand their responsibilities and then what comes with that. So that can be short term, oftentimes for organic farmers, long term, or for pasturing farmers. Long-term leases work better just because then you have a longer time to build the soil and do the things that you need to do. And then we talked about that ground lease earlier. That can be a good option to owning the land, and then an entity owns the land and then the farmer owns the structures and builds equity. Again, private landowner, public or government entity, nonprofit investors, or maybe a retired farmer. That's a great way to set up an agreement with an outgoing farmer who wants a beginning farmer to carry on the legacy. Okay, so this is a document that outlines what leasing versus owning looks like. It's formatted a little bit goofy, but I think you can see the gist of it. So total farm income for this farm is $330,000, and that's gross income. Operating expenses, the same year, same situation, except in one, the farm is renting the land, and in the other, the farmer owns the land. So the operating expenses are $245,000. And then in the rental situation, depreciation is less, that's $10,000. And then there's no interest, and there is rent, which is $21,000. And that is different, and there are no taxes. So the total expenses are $273,000, and the total net income is $57,000. And then there might be a possibility for residential rent as well, which would take away from that. In the situation where they own the land, there's a little bit more cost involved. So depreciation is $20,000, interest is $25,000, taxes are $9,000, and then the total expenses are $297,500, which then leaves $32,500 as income. So it just sort of shows how it might benefit beginning farmers to rent land when you start out, just so you can get, because it is so capital heavy to start farming. It might just help you get your farm business established, get some years under your belt, get some Schedule Fs on the books, all of that might be beneficial. Okay, I touched on this a little bit, the creative paths to tenure. Land trusts, American Farmland Trust is one great land trust that I'm familiar with, and they offer ways for farmers to buy land at an affordable cost. And they also employ easements to help do that, which is a protection on the land that lowers the value of the land potentially, so that then it's more affordable for beginning farmers. Cooperative ownership, you'll hear about that soon from Hannah. Again, another way to make the cost more affordable. And then farm transitions. It's really important to have the support that you need on both sides for the beginning farmer and for the retiring farmer, because it can be difficult to let go of your legacy that you've created. But farm transitions can be a great way to creatively help beginning farmers farm. Building a team. So it's really important to have the people that you need on your side. I just alluded to that, even if you choose to do a farmland transfer situation where a retiring farmer gradually or pretty rapidly just lets go of their farm and transfers that to the ownership and the operation management of a beginning farmer. You need to have a good team with you. So my role is that I'm a farmland access navigator. I work for Moses, but I work in partnership with Renewing the Countryside. And my role in that partnership is a navigator. So I help beginning farmers through the process of buying or renting land, through the process of acquiring land. That doesn't necessarily mean I find them a farm. What it means is that I help assemble their portfolio, put together the documents that they need, find the support, the lawyer, the realtor, all of that support that is needed, and even sometimes just counseling them through decisions in a pressure and time sensitive situation. It's really great to have somebody who's helping you talk through some of those decisions because it is a big deal. And then realtor, really important to find a realtor. We have some pretty good ones in Minnesota and Wisconsin that are more familiar with small farms and like the needs of food farms. It's a little bit different from commodity farms, as you know. Financial advisor, it's great to have somebody that knows the numbers and can crunch them with you and can help you in that process. Peer network, this is huge. There's so many options. Moses has a great conference in La Crosse every year, and there are just a number of different ways to find other farmers. SFA, the Sustainable Farming Association, Land Stewardship Project, there are a number of great organizations that help you network with other farmers. Attorney, it's really important to have a good attorney. We have some recommendations on those. And then loan officer. This is huge. My family's farm 6 years ago, we had a loan officer with the Farm Service Agency in Wisconsin. We never would have bought our farm without her. She advocated for us. She explained all the things to me in terms that I could understand. And she was so awesome. So I think it can be really, really important to have some of these people on your side. All right, and now it's the fun time of the webinar when we get to hear from Hannah Brockville of Humble Hands Harvest. She has a great story of how she is continuing to work cooperatively and acquire farmland and build a house and do all the things to feed her community. So stay tuned for Hannah Brockville with Humble Hands Harvest. I'm here with Hannah Brockville with Humble Hands Harvest near Decorah, Iowa. And she has a unique and really cool farm ownership story. And so she's going to share some of that today. Welcome, Hannah. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
So can you just start out and give us a little background on your farming history and how you came to be here today?
Sure. Yeah. So I did not grow up on a farm. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, the child of academics, and I thought I was going to become an academic. And so I was at a liberal arts college studying math, and I realized that I wanted my life's work to be something more tangible and more like actually impactful on the lives of the people around me. And so with that in mind, I landed on food and on growing food. And it felt like something that a person could do anywhere. And it was a good thing for the community that farm was in, and ideally for the land as well. And, I didn't know much about it, but it just felt good. And that's how I started farming. Out of college, I got an internship on a farm in Texas. And then eventually I landed in Decorah, Iowa, and was working on farms here. And, the trajectory of farming, you're a farm worker, and then the next step up, the next available step up is farm owner. And it's a pretty big leap to make, but I was on that trajectory and I wanted to do it. And so I found an opportunity to rent land in a kind of incubator style. And that's when Humble Hands Harvest got started. That was in 2013. And I rented almost 2 acres of land from a grass-fed beef farm. So I rented one of their paddocks and grew vegetables and sent those vegetables along on their trucks to the Twin Cities to be used in restaurants. So that was a really cool arrangement to get me started. So I rented there for 2 years, and then I found another place where I could be closer to my community in Decorah. And so I moved there and rented on a different place for 2 years. And after 4 years of renting, during my fourth year of renting land, it started becoming really clear to me that it wasn't sustainable for me to not be able to invest in the soil and in kind of perennial crops and that kind of thing in this rental year to year situation. It wasn't going to work for the vision that I had for the kind of farming that I wanted to do. And it also wasn't working for me in terms of my personal sustainability. I wanted to work with other people and I didn't want to be their boss. I wanted to collaborate with them. So that was a pretty big realization to come to be like, wow, maybe I won't farm next year unless I find permanent land to do it on and I find someone to farm with me. So luckily, both of those things happened.
So what year was
And
that?
yeah, so that was 2016 that I was kind of in that conundrum. But I'll tell the story of the land first. The land that Humble Hands Harvest is on now is a 22-acre piece that was conventionally cropped for decades. And in, I think it was 2014, the owners of that land were retiring, moving to town, wanted to sell it, were planning on selling it at auction. And the neighbors up the hill got wind of it and were afraid of what might happen if a hog confinement operator won the auction and what would happen to the neighborhood and their quality of life. And so our neighbor Steve organized a bunch of people in Decorah to buy that land collectively outright from the people who were sending it to auction. Yeah, so he formed an LLC and people bought into the LLC shares that were valued at $5,500, and an acre of that land was valued at $5,500. So people bought shares of the LLC, and then this group of people owned this land collectively. And it's kind of funny because they didn't have a vision for it other than no hog confinement.
Yeah.
And so luckily, that was my second year farming as Humble Hands Harvest. And I heard about Steve's project from his daughter, and I was like, I should buy into that. Like, I want land in Decorah someday. And so I did. I bought a share of that. And that meant that I was part of the decision-making process of this group of people. So over those next few years, the group decided to put the land into hay, which is really good because the other option was CRP. And if they had put the land into CRP, I wouldn't have been able to farm it.
Mhm.
So I was in the funny position of like arguing against conservation.
Yeah. I know, because those are longer
But
term programs, right? So
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
So it would still be in CRP now
yeah.
if they had put it in then. Yeah, the group put the land into hay, and that was great because it gave the land time to have basically 3 years of rest before I was finally ready to
Mhm.
actually go for it in 2017. So the way it transitioned from this group owning the land to me being able to farm it was interesting and convoluted because one option would have been for that group to still own the land and to invest in the infrastructure that was necessary for a farmer to be able to use it, like a vegetable farmer like me. But that's a lot of infrastructure, and that group of people wasn't necessarily ready to or interested in making
So
those investments.
so no well, no nothing, just
No,
like raw
nothing.
land. Yep.
Yep. hmm
Okay.
So the land had been surveyed in such a way that there were 4 different parts of the land that could be kind of separated from each other. And so I bought more shares of the LLC. I bought a couple different people out of their ownership of it using match savings things through LSP and PFI and things like that. So a lot of patching together of
Mhm.
resources there. And I bought 8 acres and we parceled those off, and those are in my name, while the
Mhm.
LLC kept owning the rest of the property. So that was in early 2017 when that exchange happened. And so that meant that I could then put in a well, get electricity to the land, get a deer fence built, and then put up a greenhouse and a yurt for me to live in. So all of those things happened in spring of 2017. It was a lot.
That's a lot of expense and a lot of work. Were you
Yeah.
farming too actively while you were doing all that?
Yeah, so at the end of 2016, my farm was flooded out because the land I was renting was in a floodplain. So that gave me a couple more months than I normally would have in the winter to get myself together, which I guess in retrospect is a fine thing,
Yeah.
although it sucked at the time. But yeah, we were farming. So we got the well in, it was like May when electricity and water were there. And the fall before, we knew that this was going to happen. So we tilled up and cover cropped the kind of 2 acres that we grow our vegetables on.
So did you personally piece together the funds to buy that 8 acres, or were you a co-op structure at that time? What did that look like?
Yeah, so those 8 acres are still owned by Hannah Brockville, me
Okay.
personally. So the way I did it was I had bought some originally. I think I bought another 1.5 later using a matched savings thing. Then someone gifted me their one share, which was amazing. They were actually the landowners of the land that had flooded out, so they felt pretty bad for me. um,
Yeah.
and then there were 5 acres worth that another couple owned, and they wanted me to buy those 5 acres. And I was like, I don't have that money. But they were like, Hannah, you should do this, and then you can go. And so I got in touch with my uncle, who's a doctor, and he lent me the money to buy those 5 acres. So I'm paying him interest every year. And then in a couple years, I'm going to start, or maybe just 1 year, I'm going to start paying down principal on that loan.
Sure.
So really grateful for that connection.
So I think we heard like what made you decide on cooperative ownership, like you want to work collaboratively, right? So what does that look like?
Yeah, Emily is my co-farmer, and she joined the farm in 2017, that same year that we accessed the land and did all the infrastructure. She had been working on other farms and felt like the right person to ask, and really took it super seriously, which is good. So our first year, we didn't know that we wanted to be a co-op necessarily. And so we just agreed to split the profits of the farm 50-50. We both put in $1,000 to a new bank account that we created for our collaboration. And most of the infrastructure was owned by me. And so we decided that the farm entity, our LLC that we created, would pay rent to me for that first year. So that's how we organized it really simply that year. It was clear to Emily that she wanted to stay with this thing and she wanted to invest in it like I had invested in it. Like the first year, so many people knew me and didn't know her, and so they thought she was my helper or my employee, which is kind of offensive when you're a co-owner. And so she wanted some way to be like really clear about how she's not Hannah's helper, but she's like a co-owner. And so those were some of the motivations for really thinking about our structure. And so what we did was we sat down with a friend who was really into the new economy, as she called it, and worker ownership. And so she talked us through making an operating agreement for our LLC that would mimic a worker owned. And I think most worker owned co-ops, at least in Iowa, but probably in the country, are LLCs actually that are just organized internally as cooperatives. What that means is that our work is the thing that determines our income from the farm. So we try to work equal numbers of hours and then pay ourselves equally, as opposed to however much capital, that's where how the profits get distributed. So that's the interesting or different thing about a worker-owned co-op. So I have more capital still in the business than Emily does, but that doesn't reflect in how I get paid.
So do you have like a set wage that you each get paid, or?
Yeah, we just have a monthly salary that we pay ourselves. And then at the end of the year, in theory, if we had a lot of extra cash, we might pay ourselves cooperative dividends out of that. But we haven't yet.
Well, that's so cool. That's so interesting. So can you highlight professionals who have helped you along the way? Like what has been like your friend who is really familiar with worker owned internal structures? Who else really helped you?
I feel like a lot of this stuff we've pretty much made up by ourselves. And we worked with lawyers to access the land, but they weren't actually super helpful and they were kind of slow and whatever. So I wouldn't actually name them as being super helpful on the way. It was mostly organizations like the Land Stewardship Project and Practical Farmers of Iowa who had those like beginning farmer programs and helped us think about our business plans and things like that. That was super useful and also good to like connect with peers. Like
Mhm.
people from my programs through both of those organizations are still people that I'm connected with, which is really nice. Yeah, our worker ownership friend, she led us toward the Sustainable Economies Law Center that has a lot of interesting and good resources. And also, I think there's a federation of worker owned co ops that we've also connected with, which has been really fun.
So do you have like an internal structure for conflict? How do you handle it if you have disagreement?
We're lucky in that we're just a 2-person co op right now. And so
Mhm.
it's pretty easy to come to something, to meet somewhere in the middle. If there were 3 or 4 people involved, it would get infinitely more complicated. We haven't figured out what that structure will be once there are more people involved. But we do have like a number of practices to basically keep ourselves on the same page. So the big one is that every year we have an annual retreat where we go for 2 days and we sit down with our budget spreadsheet and with our planting spreadsheets and we talk it all through and think about it. And Emily and I have like slightly different styles, but also pretty complementary and also really similar like values. And so it's been really good to like have differences of opinion because it makes our farm richer, I think. And because there are just 2 of us and we're both really
Mhm.
committed to the farm, it's pretty easy to find a way forward,
Yeah.
I think, every time.
Good.
There are
That's
plenty of
good.
tears involved, but
It's part of growth. And that's the commitment of living interdependently is you're just going to keep working it out. And it's
Mhm.
great. Is there anything else that you want to share with somebody who's thinking about doing this kind of structure or as far
Mm.
as people are getting more creative with accessing land and different things? So is there anything you feel like you want to share that you haven't?
Yeah, I feel really lucky that these opportunities happened and I was able to take them and shape the thing that I wanted out of a bunch of unknowns. And I guess my advice would be to like be really open and to not expect a linear path to the ultimate goal. And maybe the ultimate goal, what you think you know is your ultimate goal, turns out to be different. That can also be beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love your story. It's a great story. Thank you for sharing it. And your story is kind of a model. Pieces can be taken for other people. And I know that you shared it in a lot of places. And I think that's really important. So thank you for being willing to do that.
Yeah, I want everyone to have access to land, so might as well share.
Totally. Thanks for joining us on our first part of our 3-part series webinar sponsored by Compeer with Renewing the Countryside. If you feel like you're ready to make that step to start looking for farmland and assembling your portfolio and working on all these things, go to gotfarmland.org and fill out the intake form. And one of the navigators will contact you. Just be thinking through these questions. How are you hoping we can assist you? What are you looking for? What do you want from us? What are your goals for farming? Are you looking to actively grow your farm business? Are you going to keep your off-farm job and be a homesteader to start? What are you trying to do? It's good because then we can better help you in guiding you towards resources. Be able to briefly describe your background in farming. It's really useful. And then what is your timeline? What are you looking for? That can really help us help you. Okay, we have a number of farmland access navigators in the tri-state area. So once you fill out that intake form, depending on where you are, then you will be contacted by one of us and we can help you from there. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for part 2 when we talk about assessment and refining our goals and land search resources.